It's not often you hear Formula One drivers wanting to go home before the race has even begun, but that's exactly what happened in Saudi Arabia. The drivers had enough of the country and just wanted to get out. What was it that divided the F1 world over safety concerns? How did a 4-hour-long meeting decide the race? And how were the drivers almost held hostage? Stay tuned to find out. F1 under attack? In Formula One, normally all of the attacking is done on the track. Overtaking and outbraking rivals are key parts of motor racing. But in Saudi Arabia this year, everyone in the paddock was shocked when there was attacking off the track too. It all started when there was a missile strike less than 10 miles from the racetrack. It was so close that cameras shooting the circuit captured puffs of smoke in the background. The attack was on a nearby oil storage facility and was part of the ongoing conflict in Yemen. But the missile strike was during the first practice session on Friday and had many people rattled. The session was canceled and all of the team bosses were called into a meeting. Saudi Arabian officials were quick to try to put everyone at ease. State representatives told them that top-level security would be guaranteed throughout the weekend to ensure the safety of all the staff, drivers, and audience. Apparently, this was enough to calm the concerns of the bosses, but they all voted that the race should go ahead as planned. In fact, Mercedes man Toto Wolff said that the circuit would be the safest place to be in the country over the weekend. Maybe for the team bosses who can be safely sitting in the team garages, but the drivers are a little more exposed on the track. Drive or survive. The bosses were happy, so I guess that's it, right? Well, not exactly. There are only 20 drivers in Formula One, and because of that, it's not that difficult for them to hold their own meetings. There have been many issues over the years involving driver safety that requires the drivers to unite together, and that's why the Grand Prix Drivers Association was created, to talk about and resolve these kinds of issues. So, after the bosses had their meetings, the drivers decided to have one of their own. The most famous meeting is portrayed in the F1 film Rush, where Niki Lauda and James Hunt are arguing about the safety in Nürburgring in Germany. That meeting really happened, and it was Niki who was trying to get all the other drivers to boycott the race. During the race, Niki crashed his Ferrari and caught fire, leaving him with permanent scarring on his face. And that's exactly what the Drivers Association wants to avoid happening again. The meeting in Saudi Arabia was held behind closed doors, but reports came out suggesting that most of the drivers were not comfortable racing. After a couple of hours, the drivers were joined by the team bosses, who tried to convince them that they should continue with the race. After all, without the drivers, you don't have a race. Teams could have opted to use their reserve drivers, but it would be a big dent in the reputation of Formula One. Finally, past midnight and after 4 hours of negotiations, an agreement was reached that saw racing continue as usual. But it wasn't business as usual. Media events were canceled on Saturday. Some commentators speculated that this might have been to stop drivers from reacting to the news in a negative way, signing a new deal. The Saudi government has said that it is willing to do whatever Formula One wants in order to ensure that they continue hosting a Grand Prix. But this last incident might be the last straw for the F1 management. For years, the sport has faced harsh criticism for hosting a Grand Prix in the country. That's because of the government's human rights record against treatment of its citizens. On the day of the missile attack, Lewis Hamilton spoke up about injustices within the country. Hamilton received a letter from a 14-year-old boy who was on death row. This year, the Saudi government executed in just one day. Lewis said that putting such a young person to death was mind-blowing, and that at that age, you still don't know what the hell you're doing in life. And it's not just its own citizens who Saudi Arabia has targeted. The war in Yemen has caused an estimated 300,000 deaths and over 24 million people requesting aid. This is not a good look for Formula One. Earlier in the year, the Russian Grand Prix was canceled because Russia invaded Ukraine. All of the drivers expressed solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and many said that they would refuse to race in Russia. The main sponsor of Haas was removed, and Nikita Mazepin even lost his spot in the team. This has people asking why there haven't been similar actions taken against Saudi Arabia. Is it simply too much money to resist? Or do the sponsorship connections also complicate things? Coming up, how much money did Formula One stand to lose if they canceled the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix? And how were the drivers almost held hostage? Don't go anywhere to find out. Held hostage? When it was still undecided whether the race would be going ahead, there were concerns about if the athletes would be able to leave the country safely. Saudi Arabia requires an exit visa to be approved, and there have been some high-profile people left in limbo before. Back in 2019, when the World Wrestling Entertainment Company had a performance in the country, there was a payment dispute. According to the WWE, the Saudi government hadn't coughed up their check for the last event they had. Because of this, the company cut their live stream short and left audiences asking questions. The scarier part was when the performers were already at the airport. They had checked in, were on the plane, and ready to take off. But the plane didn't move. It stayed on the tarmac for 6 hours. It was carrying most of the staff, performers, and personnel from the event. Understandably, those on board were starting to freak out. They were going to miss their next event planned back in the United States, and they had no idea what was happening. They were eventually released, with the government pointing to mechanical problems. But the performers were not convinced. The year before, Saudi Arabia had killed a journalist at their embassy in Istanbul. In broad daylight, they invited him in and assassinated him. So you can understand why why the wrestlers were a little on edge. They were let go after 6 hours of sitting on the tarmac. But this year, some feared that the Saudi government could do something similar if the Grand Prix didn't go ahead as planned. What was at stake? Money is what makes the world go round. And the cold hard truth about Formula One is that money influences most of the decisions. Saudi Arabia has a deal with F1 worth $900 million. And more than that, the main sponsor of the sport is Aramco, which is a Saudi Arabian state-owned oil company. The company is paying $450 million to have their brand all over the circuits. So, F1 had a lot of money to lose. It's no wonder that they were so desperate to continue with the race. F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali said that the sport has the duty to race in Saudi Arabia. He thinks that bringing attention to the country will also help change the culture of the country. But it was a scary time to be an F1 driver. After the weekend, Lewis Hamilton said that he felt relieved and happy to go home. The whole incident has been stressful and nerve-wracking. Lando Norris had a similar message and said that he had been nervous throughout the entire weekend. Many fans agreed. For them, they couldn't understand why the race hadn't been canceled for the safety of the drivers. But Lewis said it best: cash is king. And in F1, there is always a solution if money is involved. Hamilton has been the most vocal about these kinds of issues in the past, and he has used his celebrity in the last year to criticize Saudi Arabia's human rights record. His 2021 rival, Max Verstappen, agreed and said that the drivers will need to sit down and have a meeting with F1 about the future of the sport. But in a sport run by billionaires for billionaires, and with billionaires' sons as drivers, we won't be expecting any major change anytime soon. Do you think Formula One should have canceled the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix? And do the drivers have enough power? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.